The air in the boardroom at redevelopment was cold, tasting of recycled oxygen and money. It was a sterile space of glass and black granite, dominated by a table so long and polished it seemed to reflect a colder version of the world. At its head, Evelyn Reed was methodically dismantling a man's career. "It's not just uninspired, Robert," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the sharp edge of a scalpel. "It's a declaration of surrender. The city council sees a glass box that says nothing, and frankly, so do I." Robert, her lead architect, a man paid a fortune to have vision, withered under her gaze. The rejected blueprints for the Viridia Community Concourse were spread between them like a battlefield map after a lost war. In the far corner of the room, Liam Hayes tried to make himself invisible. He pushed a damp cloth over the residue of a coffee spill, the scent of lemon cleaner, a humble intrusion on the room's expensive perfume. It was take your child to work day, a corporate charade of family values, and his daughter Maya sat patiently on a chair by the door, her sketchbook open on her lap, a world of swirling crayon castles more real to her than this tomb of ambition. Drawn by the intricate architectural models on the table, Maya slid off her chair. She crept closer, her eyes wide with wonder at the tiny trees and miniature buildings. Reaching for a closer look, her elbow caught the bottle of apple juice on the credenza. It fell with a sickening pop, a wave of amber liquid washing over the master blueprints. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Robert looked as though the juice were acid. Evelyn's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with fury. "Dad!" Maya cried, her face crumpling. Liam was already moving. He dropped his cloth and rushed to the table, his movements swift and practiced. Reassuringly, "It's okay, sweetie, it's just a spill." He grabbed a handful of napkins, his mind entirely on damage control. He began carefully separating the soaked, heavyweight pages, laying them out on the dry side of the table. And then, his hands took over. The years of training, the thousands of hours spent over drafting tables, the muscle memory buried deep beneath the calluses of a janitor, it all surfaced. Without thinking, his fingers began to shift the pages. "This flow is all wrong," he muttered, his voice a low hum just beneath the shocked silence. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was speaking to the building itself. "You're losing prime square footage here. The public access is a dead zone." His hands moved with an unconscious grace. He slid the wet schematic for the west entrance away from the main plaza and realigned it with the north-facing retail sector. He took the rejected atrium design and, with two quick folds, demonstrated how it could be integrated to create a flowing, intuitive pathway. He wasn't just cleaning up a mess. He was solving the puzzle. He'd created a new, elegant, and breathtakingly functional entry point. The room was utterly still. Robert stared, his mouth agape, at the janitor who had just effortlessly fixed a problem his entire team had broken themselves on for 6 months. Evelyn Reed's eyes, however, were locked on Liam's hands. She watched them move with a certainty and intelligence that was utterly at odds with the gray janitor's uniform he wore. Her gaze traveled from the transformed layout, the solution she had been desperately searching for, up to the tired, unassuming face of the man who had created it. Her mask of cold authority cracked, replaced by a raw, unadulterated disbelief. The janitor. It was the janitor. Evelyn Reed's world was a fortress of glass and silence, 40 floors above the city. From her corner office, Viridia City wasn't a place where people lived. It was a portfolio. She saw the angular silhouette of the First National Tower she had acquired, the sprawling logistics center she had built, the residential high-rise whose record-breaking sale had made the front page of the financial press. It was a map of her victories, yet surveying it brought her no triumph, only a familiar, restless hum of inadequacy. The source of her current torment lay spread across a chrome and ebony table, the latest rejection of the Viridia Community Concourse. The city's feedback was a masterclass in polite condescension, lacks a human-scale entry point, fails to invite public engagement, a monument of technical achievement rather than a space of communal welcome. Each phrase was a fresh turn of the knife. Each one echoed a voice from her past. She closed her eyes, and the memory, sharp and unwelcome as a shard of glass, surfaced. She was 22, interning at her father's firm, presenting her first solo design. He had looked at her detailed plans, his face impassive. He hadn't raised his voice. He never did. "It's a competent structure, Evelyn," he had said, the word competent landing like a blow. He tapped a finger on the central plaza she had designed. "But it has no vision. You've built a box for people to pass through. You haven't given them a reason to stay." He was dead now, a ghost who lived in the margins of zoning board reports and the silent judgment of her own board of directors. The concourse was meant to be her answer to him. It was meant to be her legacy, a structure so bold, so undeniably significant that it would finally silence his ghost. Instead, it was failing for the exact same reason he had pinpointed 2 decades ago. She had built another beautiful, empty box. Her ruthlessness in business was a shield, but it could not protect her from the one thing she truly feared, that her father had been right all along. 3 miles away, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where the scent of old brick and brewing coffee hung in the air, Liam Hayes was trying to fix a leak under the kitchen sink. His world was not a fortress, but a small, cluttered lifeboat he and his daughter Maya paddled through the days. The space was a testament to quiet persistence. Books were stacked in neat, gravity-defying towers. Maya's vibrant drawings were taped to every available surface, a gallery of impossible castles and swirling, rainbow-colored cities. Maya, a serious 7-year-old with her father's intelligent eyes, was at the kitchen table, her tongue poked out in concentration. She was sketching with a set of colored pencils, her contribution to the school's annual Arts and Sciences Fair. "Dad, does a drawbridge need counterweights if it's made of light?" she asked, not looking up. Liam grunted from under the sink. "Everything needs balance, sweetie, even light." Her question was not unusual. Maya was an aspiring kid architect, a title she had given herself. Her mind was a whirlwind of structural queries and fantastical designs. It was a part of her that both thrilled and pained him, a bright echo of a life he had locked away. On the windowsill, catching the afternoon sun, sat their joint project for the competition. It was a birdhouse, but it was so much more. Designed by the two of them, it was an intricate model of a cantilevered house, a miniature masterpiece of intersecting planes and clean lines. Or it would be. A storm last week had knocked it from the sill, and one of the elegant, wing-like roof sections had snapped cleanly in two. Maya glanced from her drawing to the broken model. "We need to fix it for the competition, Daddy." Liam emerged from under the sink, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He looked at the birdhouse, then at the pile of bills on the counter. His paycheck from Reed Development barely covered their rent and groceries. There was no room for anything to break. "We will, sweetie," he said, forcing a warmth into his voice that he didn't feel. "When I have time." The broken birdhouse sat there, a silent testament to their shared dream and his current reality. It was a beautiful, unfinished thing, waiting for a time that never seemed to arrive. Weeks before the juice spill that would change everything, Liam's world and Evelyn's had brushed against each other with the friction of ships passing in the night. He was in the gleaming, cavernous lobby of the Reed Tower, on his hands and knees, shimming a wobbly leg on a low-slung Italian marble coffee table. The task required focus. The table was worth more than his car. The sharp, decisive click of heels on stone announced her approach. Evelyn Reed swept through the lobby, a phone pressed to her ear, a wake of nervous energy trailing behind her. She was a figure of immense, untouchable power, radiating an aura of cold authority. Liam kept his head down, focusing on the small hexagonal wrench in his hand, making himself a part of the building's anonymous maintenance. Her path brought her directly past him. She didn't alter her course. Her gaze was fixed on the middle distance, her voice a low, cutting murmur into the phone. "Just make sure it's done," she said. The words were not directed at him. They were directed at the air, at an underling on the other end of the line, at the world that was paid to bend to her will. She didn't see the man kneeling on the floor. She saw only a task she assumed was being completed. The casual, utter invisibility of it was a familiar sting. It was the feeling he'd been running from for years. The erasure of the man he used to be. He didn't look up. He simply tightened the final screw. heard the solid thud as the table leg settled, and watched her expensive shoes click away toward the elevator bank. His jaw was tight. A ghost of his old pride, a thing he tried to starve, flickered inside him, stubborn and defiant. He was a janitor. He was a father. He was the man fixing the table. That's all he needed to be. In the week following the boardroom incident, Liam Hayes perfected the art of invisibility. He moved through the Reed Tower like a ghost, his footsteps silent, his gaze perpetually fixed on the floor. He timed his routes to avoid the executive floors, becoming a fleeting presence in service corridors and deserted lobbies. He wanted nothing more than to be forgotten, a detail too mundane to be remembered. But his foreman, a burly, good-natured man named Frank, remembered him for a different reason. Frank saw reliability. He saw a man who was never late, who did his work without complaint, and who possessed a quiet, steady competence. And so, Liam's attempt to fade into the background failed spectacularly. "Hayes," Frank said, catching him as he wheeled his cart into the janitorial closet. "Got a new gig for you. Temporary, but important." Liam's heart sank. "What is it?" "The concourse site," Frank said, and Liam felt a cold dread snake up his spine. "Insurance is on our backs. City's getting twitchy. They want every official visitor escorted by a site-familiar employee at all times. Not management. Someone who knows the safety protocols and access points. You're my most dependable guy. It's a pain, I know, but it's by the book." And so Liam was thrust back into the one place he desperately wanted to avoid. His new duty was a special kind of torture. He became the silent, gray uniformed shadow to a parade of city inspectors, zoning officials, and sharp-suited members of the community board. He stood by holding a hard hat and a clipboard while they walked through the vast, soulless skeleton of the Viridia Community Concourse. Worse, he had to listen. "The pedestrian flow creates a natural bottleneck right at the main entrance," a crisp-voiced woman from the city planning department would declare. Liam would stare at a steel girder, the words echoing his own silent, screaming critique. "There's no intuitive sense of direction," a community representative complained, gesturing at the cavernous main hall. "Where are people supposed to go? It feels hostile." Liam would nod numbly, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He was a captive audience to a live autopsy of a building he knew instinctively how to save. With each valid criticism, the ghost of the architect inside him rattled its chains. Evelyn Reed was often there for these tours, her presence a storm front of contained frustration. Her tailored suits and sharp stilettos were a stark contrast to the dust and debris of the construction site. She would stand with her arms crossed, her jaw tight, as litany of failures was read aloud. Sometimes her gaze would drift past the officials and land on Liam, the silent escort. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Confusion, annoyance, a question she hadn't yet formed. He would meet her look for a half-second before his eyes dropped back to the safety of the concrete floor. He was a janitor. He was a shadow. That's all he would let her see. The faint scent of boiled hot dogs and tomato sauce hung in the air of their small apartment. Liam was helping Maya with her math homework at the kitchen table, the numbers a simple, comforting absolute in a world that felt increasingly complex. It was in these quiet moments, the gentle scratch of Maya's pencil on paper, the low hum of the refrigerator, that he felt a fragile sense of peace. The peace was shattered by the mail slot clanking shut. Among the junk mail and a utility bill was a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the seal of the Viridia City School District. His brow furrowed as he tore it open. Official correspondence was rarely good news. He read the first paragraph, and the solid ground beneath his feet seemed to turn to sand. He read it again, the words blurring, refusing to make sense. Due to significant budgetary shortfalls and critical infrastructure failures, the board has voted to permanently close Northwood Elementary at the conclusion of the academic year. Students will be reassigned to neighboring districts based on residential zoning. The letter slipped from his fingers and fluttered onto the table. Maya looked up from her workbook, her expression full of concern. "What is it, Daddy?" Liam couldn't speak. Northwood wasn't just a school, it was Maya's world. It was Mrs. Gable, her second-grade teacher who encouraged her drawings. It was the playground where she'd made her best friend. It was the annual Arts and Sciences fair they were preparing the birdhouse for. It was the one stable, nurturing, and good place in her life that he had managed to provide, and it was being taken away. The irony was a cruel physical blow. Critical infrastructure failures. The building was failing. The bones of the place were rotten. It was an architectural problem, a problem the man he used to be could have diagnosed in a heartbeat, could have maybe even helped to solve. But that man was gone. In his place was a janitor whose paycheck left no room for architects, no power to fight a school board, no way to stop his daughter's world from being dismantled. He looked at Maya, her face full of innocent trust, and the pride he took in his quiet endurance suddenly felt like a fool's luxury. What was the virtue in suffering silently, if the person he loved most paid the price? For the first time in 5 years, the wall he had built around his past felt less like a fortress and more like a cage. Evelyn Reed sat in her silent lit office, the city lights spread below her like a diamond spill. But she wasn't looking at her empire. She was staring at the sleek tablet on her desk, replaying the security footage from the boardroom over and over again. She zoomed in on the janitor's hands, the spill, the chaos, and then the quiet, authoritative way his fingers had moved. The way they had sorted, shifted, and solved. It was an elegance born of deep, instinctual knowledge. It was the grace of a master craftsman. It was not the work of a janitor. The question of who he was had become an obsession, a knot she couldn't untangle. It gnawed at her, undermining the very foundations of her world. How could the solution to her $100 million problem be mopping her floors? At 2 a.m., she sent a single, encrypted email to her head of security, a man whose loyalty was absolute and whose methods were discreet. The subject line was one word: Hayes. The report was on her desk by noon the next day. It was a thin file, but its contents were seismic. Name: Liam Hayes. Former occupation: Principal Architect, Hayes and Sterling Architecture. Notable achievements: winner of the 2018 Pritzker Fellowship, designer of the award-winning Oak Haven Public Library and the much-lauded Solis Pavilion. Status: firm declared bankruptcy 5 years ago. Cause: catastrophic structural failure and subsequent collapse of the Helios Project residential tower. Evelyn leaned back, the leather of her chair groaning in the silence. Hayes and Sterling, she remembered the name. They had been brilliant, the rising stars of human-centric design. And the Helios Project had been their spectacular, career-ending implosion. But the facts weren't enough. The report told her what happened, but it didn't explain the man she saw on the security footage, or the quiet, haunted man who escorted her through. The concourse site. Driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand, she broke a lifelong rule. She left the office in the middle of the afternoon. She drove her severe black sedan into a part of the city she only ever saw from 40 floors up. It was a neighborhood of old brick, corner bodegas, and kids playing on the sidewalks. Using the address from the file, she found his street and parked a block away, feeling like an alien in her own city. And then she saw them. Through the large, clean window of a second-floor apartment, she saw Liam and a little girl, his daughter Maya, sitting at a kitchen table. Their heads were bent together in shared concentration. In front of them sat a small, intricate wooden structure, a birdhouse. Even from this distance, Evelyn could recognize the clean lines, the clever use of cantilevers. They were working on it, together. Liam pointing to a section, Maya nodding, her small hands carefully applying a dab of glue. The image struck Evelyn with the force of a physical blow. It was the quiet, generative intimacy of it. It was creation on a scale so small, so personal, it felt more real than anything in her own life. Her concourse was a grand, empty gesture. Their birdhouse was a world. Her curiosity about him, once a professional obsession, now deepened into something more personal, more unsettling. She was looking at a life, and for the first time she felt the profound, aching emptiness of her own. She found him the next day in a deserted corridor on the third floor of the concourse site, methodically cleaning a row of windows that looked out over the city. She had rehearsed this. She would be direct, professional, logical. "Mr. Hayes," she began. Liam froze, then slowly turned, his face betraying nothing. Neutral. "Ma'am, I know who you are," she said, her voice even, direct. "I know about Hayes and Sterling. I know about the Solace Pavilion. It was exceptional." He said nothing. His knuckles were white where he gripped the squeegee. This was it, the moment he had dreaded, urgent. "My project is failing," she continued, pressing on, determined. "What you did in the boardroom, that insight is what I need. I want to hire you. As a consultant, name your price. I'll double what you made as a principal at your firm." She laid the offer on the table, a clean, powerful, transactional solution. It was the language she understood. It was an offer no one in their right mind would refuse. A flicker of something dark and painful moved across Liam's face. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw past the janitor and glimpsed the architect, a man of immense, wounded pride. Her offer wasn't an opportunity to him. It was an exclamation. It was a rich woman trying to buy the most broken, traumatized part of him and put it to work for her. All the shame of his failure, the public humiliation, the loss of his wife, his firm, his life, it all came rushing back, a toxic flood. "I'm a janitor, Ms. Reed," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. The two words were a wall of ice. Annoyed, "That's ridiculous," she countered, her composure starting to fray. "You're an architect, a brilliant one." Bitterly, "I was," he bit back, the word full of jagged edges. "And I'm not anymore." He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze unflinching and cold. Firmly, "I respectfully decline your offer, and I'd like to request a transfer to another Reed property, effective immediately." He turned his back on her. He turned his back on the money that could have solved the problem of Maya's school, that could have fixed everything. He picked up his bucket and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the empty concrete corridor. Evelyn stood alone, surrounded by the silent, failing monument she had built. She was stunned into absolute silence, clutching an offer that had been refused, rejected by a man who had nothing, and yet, somehow, had left her feeling like the one who was truly bankrupt. Liam's refusal left a crater in the center of Evelyn's world. For 2 days, she operated on autopilot, her authority a well-worn coat she put on each morning, but it no longer fit. The janitor's rejection was more than an insult. It was a judgment. It echoed her father's old dismissal. Competent, but no vision. Liam Hayes had vision, and he had judged hers as worthless. Her security chief, a man accustomed to digging up financial leverage or personal secrets, had also forwarded her a public notice about the impending closure of Northwood Elementary. It was a simple piece of data, but in it, Evelyn saw not leverage, but a glimmer of a different kind of key. It was a problem that money alone couldn't solve to her satisfaction. She could write a check and save the school, another transaction in a life full of them, but that wouldn't get her what she truly needed. It wouldn't give her vision. She found him at the end of his shift, by the loading dock, the gray evening light softening the hard lines of the city. He was packing a small bag, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that went deeper than physical labor. He stiffened when he saw her, his entire posture becoming a defensive wall.
"My transfer request has been approved,"
he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question.
"I know,"
Evelyn replied, her own voice quieter than she intended. She stopped a respectful distance away. There was no talk of money this time, no offer of employment. The power dynamic had been irrevocably scrambled, and she was the one coming to him at a deficit.
"I read about Maya's school,"
she said. His head snapped up, a flash of protective fury in his eyes.
"That has nothing to do with you."
"I know,"
she said quickly, raising a hand as if to ward off his anger.
"My foundation. We could help. We could write a check, but that's not why I'm here."
She took a breath, the confession sticking in her throat.
"I'm here because you were right. My building is a failure. My architects are failing. Vulnerable. I'm failing."
The raw admission hung in the air between them. It was a vulnerability so profound, so alien coming from her, that it momentarily disarmed him, determined.
"You said you aren't an architect anymore,"
she continued, her gaze unwavering.
"Fine. I don't want to hire an architect. I need a teacher. I need you to show me what I can't see. Use my project, use the concourse as a case study. Show me where it's dead. Show me why."
She took another step closer, her voice dropping lower.
"But don't do it there. Do it somewhere that matters. Take me to Maya's school. Walk me through it. Show me why it's failing. Pleading. Teach me how to see it through your eyes."
Liam stared at her, caught in a disorienting trap. She wasn't offering to buy his genius, she was asking to borrow his perspective. She had tied his daughter's future not to a contract, but to a plea for knowledge. To refuse was to protect his wounded pride, but to accept was to take the first terrifying step towards saving Maya's world, even if it meant reopening the door to his own personal hell. Gravelly. "One time," he said, the words tasting like rust in his mouth. "One walkthrough, that's all." Northwood Elementary looked even sadder up close. Water stains bled down the brick facade like tears. The playground was a desolate landscape of peeling paint and tired-looking metal. Inside, the corridor smelled of dust and mildew, and the fluorescent lights hummed with a weary, flickering cadence. Liam walked through the building with Evelyn at his side, and as he began to speak, the janitor receded. The architect, dormant for 5 years, slowly awoke. He wasn't looking at a failing school. He was seeing a flawed design. "Look here," he said, stopping in the main corridor. "The lockers create a series of blind corners," explaining. "It's a security issue, but it's also a social one. It breaks the space up, makes it feel disjointed, disappointed. There's no central point of gathering." He led her to the library, a gloomy room with low ceilings and high, narrow windows. Serious. Natural light is critical for learning. It affects mood, concentration. Frustrated. This room feels like a punishment, sad. It tells the kids that reading is something you do in the dark. They ended up on the playground. Liam leaned against the rusted chain-link fence, his gaze sweeping over the area. Evelyn stood beside him, silent, her expensive leather boots looking absurdly out of place on the cracked asphalt. Thoughtful. "The real failure is out here," Liam said, his voice softer now, more thoughtful, explaining. "See how the benches are pushed to the edges, facing away from the equipment? They're placed for adult supervision, not for communal engagement." Disappointed. "They create observers, not participants." He pointed toward the swing set. Frustrated. "And the sightlines are all wrong. From that bench, a teacher can't see the slide. From the door, you can't see behind the climbing frame." Concerned. "It makes the space feel chaotic, unsafe, sad. It forces kids into smaller, more defensive groups." He wasn't just talking about structures anymore. He was talking about behavior, about feeling, about the invisible ways a space could shape a life. He spoke of how a wider doorway could feel more welcoming, how a circular seating arrangement could foster conversation, how the texture of a handrail could offer a sense of stability. Evelyn listened, and a profound, unsettling silence grew inside her. She had spent her life dealing with concrete, steel, and glass. She thought in terms of square footage, load-bearing walls, and return on investment. She had been trying to build a monument, a grand statement of her own success. And in that moment, watching Liam map out the secret, emotional architecture of a children's playground, she had her epiphany. It was a sudden, stark, and horrifyingly clear realization. Resigned. Her father had been right. Sad. She had no vision. Because vision wasn't about making a statement. It was about starting a conversation. It wasn't about the container, it was about the life held within it. Liam Hayes didn't design buildings. He designed experiences. He designed for people. His genius wasn't just in his technical skill, it was in his empathy. The concourse was empty because she was empty. She had been trying to fill a void in her legacy while ignoring the void in herself. The revelation was not a gentle grace. It was a violent, clarifying shock, a moment that shattered the very foundation of her identity, leaving her feeling exposed and utterly, terrifyingly lost. Armed with her newfound, terrifying clarity, Evelyn Reed returned to her tower and declared war on her own project. She called an emergency meeting with her board of investors, a collection of gray-haired men who worshipped at the altar of the bottom line. She stood before them, not with the cold, surgical precision they were used to, but with a convert's unnerving zeal. She scrapped the old plans. She spoke of human-centric design, communal pathways, and psychological architecture. She proposed a radical new direction for the concourse, one based on the principles Liam had articulated on a rundown playground. The board stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Evelyn," said Marcus Thorne, The chairman and a man who had been a contemporary of her father's. This is poetry. We are in the business of commercial real estate. What is the projected cost of this re-envisioning? Her lead architect, Robert, who had been forced to attend, saw his opening. He stepped forward, his face a mask of faux concern. The structural revisions alone would push us 30% over budget. That's a conservative estimate. The demolition of the existing West Wing framework would set us back at least 9 months. The room grew cold. Budgets and timelines were a language the board understood. Poetry was not. We are already over-leveraged on this project, Thorne said, his voice hard. The banks will not extend further credit for a flight of fancy. If you insist on this new direction, the board will be forced to table a vote of no confidence. We will pull our funding and cut our losses. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Her legacy project, her entire position, was on the line. The humiliation festered in Robert. He had been sidelined, his work implicitly declared worthless, all because of a janitor. His professional pride curdled into resentment, drove him to action. He began to talk. He spoke quietly to subcontractors about the instability of the new plan. He leaked anonymous, alarming cost projections to a friendly journalist at the city's business journal. He framed Evelyn's new vision not as a bold innovation, but as the erratic, fiscally irresponsible whim of an unstable CEO. The resistance was no longer just internal. It was external, tangible, and growing. Evelyn found herself isolated. Her investors were threatening to abandon her, her lead architect was actively sabotaging her, and the community, already skeptical of corporate promises, was being fed a narrative of chaos and incompetence. Her epiphany had shown her the way, but the path was fraught with professional risk, a gauntlet of skepticism and betrayal. Forging an alliance with Liam Hayes would not be a simple matter of hiring him. It would mean fighting a war on 2 fronts, one for the soul of her building and another for the survival of her career. 2 months later, the Viridia Community Concourse was a ghost, a half-finished skeleton held in the purgatory of investor politics and boardroom warfare. The battle for its soul and for Evelyn's career was still being fought in hushed, hostile meetings high above the city. But here, on the ground, something new was being built. The library at Northwood Elementary was no longer dark and forgotten. Sunlight, thick with swirling dust motes, streamed through newly washed windows. The air smelled of fresh paint, sawdust, and coffee. It had become a makeshift office, a headquarters for a project of a different scale. Liam and Evelyn stood side by side over a wide drafting table, their heads bent over a set of crisp, new blueprints. These were not plans for a grand corporate monument. The title block read in clean, simple letters, "The Northwood Community School and Playground Renovation." It was a pro bono project, the first official venture of the newly created Reed Foundation Community Initiative. It was their trial run, a partnership being built not on a contract, but on a shared, achievable goal. "If we move the main entrance here," Liam said, his finger tracing a new line, "we create a direct sightline to the playground. It makes the space feel more open, more connected." He was no longer the haunted man from the loading dock. The architect had returned, not with the arrogance of his past, but with the quiet confidence of a man rediscovering his purpose. Evelyn leaned in, her gaze following his finger. She saw what he meant instantly, thoughtful. "And the benches?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of genuine collaboration. "Circular," he replied with a small smile, "so people can face each other." Their dynamic was a quiet, respectful orbit. It was the careful rhythm of 2 professionals who had found a common language. The vast gulf of class and power that had once separated them had been bridged by shared blueprint. At another table, bathed in a patch of sunlight, Maya was drawing. Her sketchbook was open, but today she wasn't drawing fantastical castles. She was sketching her own version of the playground, complete with a swirling slide and a swing set that looked like it could touch the clouds. Evelyn's gaze shifted from the plans to Liam, then to Maya. A fragile, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in her chest. This was not the stark, lonely victory she had once chased. This was something quieter, more complex, and infinitely more real. It was the feeling of being a part of something, rather than standing on top of it. Liam's hand moved to point out another detail on the plans, his fingers coming to rest near hers. They didn't touch, but the space between them was charged with unspoken understanding, a partnership earned through vulnerability and mutual respect. The camera of the story would pan from their hands over to Maya's vibrant drawing and finally settle on the windowsill. There, complete and solid, sat the birdhouse. Its broken wing had been seamlessly mended, its elegant lines restored. It was ready for the school's new garden, a small promise of a future that would not be a grand, imposing monument, but a series of small, carefully built and shared spaces, a place to land, a place to begin.
Thank you for taking a quiet moment with us. Every story is a journey, and we're so glad you joined us for this one.
We believe stories are a way to connect, even when we're apart. If you felt a connection to this tale, we invite you to subscribe and become part of our growing circle.
Our question for you today is, what's a simple moment of peace you've experienced this week?
Share it in the comments. Let's fill this space with serene moments.
Until the next story, be well.